Welcome back to The Vote Matters. I'm your host, Tia Sneum, and here at TVM, we discuss political topics in a nonpartisan and entertaining manner to empower you, the voter. Today's topic of discussion is, do local elections matter? And of course, as always, the producer sitting alongside me. And as a great example for local elections, we will be discussing the LA wildfires. So, I guess starting the discussion, how do local elections affect a cause like this?
Yeah, when you think about it, there is right now a huge spotlight on three key people in LA when it comes to the LA wildfires. There is Gavin Newsom, the governor of our state, but more local is the mayor of LA, Karen Bass, and then also her appointed LA chief of police. I think it's Kristen Crowley. So they're right now under the spotlight for what is going on. Because when you think about it, Karen Bass is a very good politician, right? She's able to navigate through the waters and ultimately get to the position where she becomes the mayor of LA. But when you're part of like a city council or you're part of, let's say, a state legislature or something of that nature, right? You're just one voice of many. And so you're also one who's more or less on the outside looking in, criticizing things, trying to tweak things. But when you become the mayor, you have to have more of an operational management skill set to make sure everything in that city runs as it should. You know, when you take that oath of office to become the mayor of LA is like you are to protect the people, the property, and make sure that there is always opportunity for people to grow in a city. And when you look at what has just recently happened, man, that is the farthest thing from that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, we have the statistics. So the LA wildfires have destroyed and damaged over 10,000 structures, over 150,000 people displaced from their homes, at least 24 people dead. The number keeps on increasing, and upwards of 150 billion to half a trillion in property loss.
I mean, that is just unbelievable, right? That is just crazy numbers.
Now, I guess the question is, was this all preventable?
Well, yeah. I mean, when you think about it, what you see out there are a lot of people questioning was the chief of police pre-positioning a lot of the fire department services in key areas, knowing that these are areas of high risk and vulnerability, right? And so there's a question that wasn't happening. Now, I think the police, the chief of the police, or the LA Fire Department's chief, her budget was cut by Karen Bass by I think it was 17 million. So she didn't have the full force that they normally would have in order to deal with a lot of things. So, I think they did have some pre-positioning, but not to the extent that needed. And they knew in advance. I mean, they knew, I think it was at least a week and a half in advance, that they were saying these were going to be some of the strongest Santa Ana winds. And they knew the time, like, this is the window when this is going to happen, right?
Well, how long in advance did they know?
Well, they knew at least a week and a half in advance. Because what they see is like, when you look at the weather patterns, there's like these highs that are coming over like Idaho pushing down. And there's this low coming up through sort of the Sea of Cortez, right? And when you get that always pushes these Santa Ana winds, creates a dry wind coming over the mountain range, pushing it out to to the sea. And because of the Sierras, it creates sort of this sort of gap, and it forces these winds through it, and that's why you get very high velocity winds. Because that low on one side, the mountains on the other side, and the high coming in this way pushes all that air in a very powerful format. And it just doesn't happen overnight. And you could see this happening in advance. So when you go out there and you look at like old weather casts, like newscasts and stuff that they were talking about this weeks in advance. They knew this was coming.
And I guess that's also the other question is, or it shows that, the fire hydrants ran out of water. There just wasn't enough water to stop the fires. But, if they have that week and a half gap period prior to knowing that something like this would occur, And also just because annually it seems like this is always around the fire season, correct?
I
So
think-
why wasn't that taken care of prior to this occurrence?
That's a huge question. Like, Malibu has a lot of brush and shrubs, and sort of around the Pacific Palisades, you have the same thing, right? And there's been fires there before. There was already structures burnt there and destroyed almost 3 years ago. They knew, and it's a common thing that happens in the area. And so hey, these are areas of vulnerability. Need to be pre-positioned for these areas. But it's not enough to be pre-positioned. Like when you look at like Karen Bass, she was out of town. She was in Ghana at some inauguration for some president that had nothing to do with LA. And it's like she made a promise as the mayor. Like she says, when I'm going to get elected, I'm going to be here for LA. And the only reason I'll leave the city of LA is for something that benefits LA. Well, I don't know how going to some inauguration in Ghana benefits LA. So that's a campaign promise broken. Two, because she wasn't here and she had to fly back, she's also out of the loop. She doesn't know what's going on. And that's another thing. So like she's after the fact. And that's really sort of like not what you want from your civic leaders. And it goes far worse than that, right? So think about like all that high shrubbery, chaparral, wooded lands in this area, right? This is where the state of California does not do forest management. That means forest management is where you let sort of like if you go down to Laguna, like Laguna Beach, right? They have high hills, they have a lot of shrubbery. It's very similar to what you see in the Malibu area. And the way they sort of take care of that is they hire these herds of goats to go up into these mountains because they can climb the mountains and they'll eat everything, right? And they'll clean up all of the dead wood, they'll clean up all the grass, they'll make this stuff look pristine. And what it does is it prevents a lot of fires from happening. And so this is how sort of Laguna manages it. But there's nothing like that in LA. And in fact, Gavin Newsom and the LA, or not the LA, but the state legislature, they keep basically pushing these environmental agendas, and a lot of those agendas basically nix things like forest management. And they do other things I just don't understand. Like, there was supposed to be 7 more reservoirs developed in the LA area, right? Like, this was a bond, it was passed almost like 7 years ago. And it has not, to this date, one shovel in the ground to dig those reservoirs. And why? Because environmentalists keep suing and suing. And, that's up for leadership to just say, enough with that. You cannot risk people's lives over some, I don't know, Delta smelt or some other thing that they might say is it's an endangered species. We don't know. But that's the point of leadership says, well, we'll live with $500 billion in damage because we're protecting some bugs, some flowers, some small little fish. And I think that's what's becoming part of the spotlight from the governors in the legislator arena. And then at the local level, it's just, you should have been pre-positioned. You just should have been ready.
And then I guess now the question is too, insurance is probably going to be a big factor going forward, correct?
Oh my God.
I can't believe how many ads I've been getting for lawyers and just like damage report, stuff of that nature, or public adjusters. Like all this seems to be just exploding.
So you think about here's 10,000 structures, right? Each of those structures generally generate some kind of tax for the city, the county, and the state. Well, they're gone. You're not going to get a dime from those places anymore. And in fact, their property taxes are going down. Their sales tax will be gone. And, it's like you're going to be running out of revenue because your revenue base has basically been burnt and incinerated. And then when you look at the insurance side of the house, right? The insurance side has been a disaster in California. We have insurance companies leaving the state because our insurance commissioner won't allow them to be profitable. Now, you have other people out there, well, we're a nonprofit. You know what? You get a salary. And you might see your nonprofit because at the end you don't really make a profit. But you spend it all on your side. So you're in the same thing. You want to make money to have a livelihood. So every company is trying to make money to have a livelihood, right? And here in California, our state has messed up insurance so bad that most of the people in the Pacific Palisades or in the Eaton area, they probably don't have insurance or they don't have enough coverage. And what about them? I mean, holy cow. And it's not only that they don't have enough insurance to rebuild or to have money to go and start a new life. Think about all the property. The property. They bought these $1 million homes. You know, when you think about like the Pacific Palisades, it's probably you're starting at like 2.5 million up to $25 million for those homes. So do you think they own those homes outright, or do you think they had they borrowed?
Borrowed.
Do you think they're going to pay those loans back?
No.
Yeah. So what do you think is going to happen to those banks?
Bye-bye.
Yeah. Those banks are sitting there just like panicking. They're like, holy cow. You know, it's the trickle-down effect. You know, what we see today is not the full impact of what we're going to see over the next 4 years, 5 years. And was this preventable? I think to a certain degree, yes, it was. I think it was preventable to a certain degree. I do not think it had to be the disaster that it was today. Why were they not using certain boats that they have in the LA arsenal to pump water from the sea? Like they have these sea boats. They could pump tons of water, and they have these hoses. They can run them up the hills and fill the engines. And then people are like, well, you don't want to have seawater in there. What, you'd rather basically watch the whole hill burn versus just having some seawater and having some gaskets maybe need to be replaced? It's just mind-boggling. The lack not only of preparation, but when it hit, the lack of
lack of ownership of.
It's like creativity too. Like, okay, if this isn't working, how do I make it work? What do I have? You know, there's these big planes that carry all this water. Get those suckers down from Canada. You know, whatever it takes, get them here, right? You cannot sit there and look inept.
Well, yeah, no, it's true. And to your point, with the fire department getting, a big cut as well. Now you have guys out there that are working 18 hours a day trying to stop the fires. I mean,
There were people saying that they've been out there on the lines, doing what they were trying to do for 36. Even some people were saying like 48 hours, like no sleep.
that's crazy.
Yeah, and that's dangerous for them.
No, that's extremely dangerous because I think, what is it? When you were a former lifeguard, didn't you say, like, in order for me to save somebody, I first have to be safe myself, right?
That's absolutely right. That's 100% correct. And it gets worse. Like, you have this fire, you have all this destruction, and the amount of looters that came in afterwards. And, based on certain reports around Eden, certain reports from the Pacific Palisades, it wasn't like 10 or 15. It's like hundreds. It's like, where were the police? Where was the National Guard? These people not only lost their house, but any safe or valued possessions that might have survived the fire, they're looted. They're gone.
I think it's also, when you have such a small, with the firefighter example, right? If you have such a small group of individuals out there, but they're working like 48 hours nonstop, eventually they're going to get tired, right?
Oh, yeah.
And that's just going to spread and spread and spread because now your first responders are
Exhausted. And it's not only that, like, there's other fires breaking out, right? And so they just don't have the manpower to handle all this stuff. Like, the Santa Ana winds are going to continue through the next, I think, couple days here. And then hopefully we get a break and we can get all this stuff under control. But the damage is not just this immediate burning of the house. It's the long-term damage to so many lives. And to sit there and say, well, I might, I'm just the mayor. What was I supposed to do? You're supposed to do everything in your capacity to make sure, even if you maybe can't stop or prevent something from like this happening, you should mitigate it as much as possible. And it felt like there was no mitigation. Not only mitigation from, hey, the fire devastated so many homes and structures. The property damage is unbelievable. The displacement of 150,000 people, that's absolutely outrageous. Basically making sure that the properties are safe after the fire so that there's not all this looting. And then the joke of jokes is then, the governor's coming in and saying, hey, we're going to really clamp down on all these looters. We're going to make sure the full force of the law. This is a guy who has permitted people to loot department stores, 7-Elevens, all this stuff, like these mass lootings. As long as it's under $950, there's no problem. It's like, really? And now you're coming in and telling us this? That's, to me, there's just such a catastrophe of leadership at this point. Like, you really hope people start waking up and seeing, hey, local elections matter. And I mean, they matter a heck of a lot. Mm-hmm. It's not about just having homelessness all the time. It's not about basically people sleeping on the sidewalks all the time. It's not about not arresting people who are stealing things all the time. It's not about seeing the decay of your city all the time. It's actually about people sitting there and saying, hey, you give me your hard-earned money through taxes, and I'm going to treat it as if it's basically my money. I'm going to spend it wisely. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to do it in a way that basically is effective in making sure your livelihoods, your property, your family gets the full value of what our services can provide. And that is a far cry from what I've seen so far.
So I guess, is there any last remarks, like, the Department of Water and Power, or is there anything?
Oh, gosh, I could go down that path a long time. It's just crazy. I mean, I just really feel so bad for the tragedy that it is for these families. Mm-hmm. I mean,
you brought up a good point also prior too, is like, Los Angeles was supposed to host the World Cup, and it's supposed to host a lot of sporting events.
The Olympics is supposed to be here too.
And now that you have this devastation occurring, like the Rams playoff game couldn't even be a home game. It had to be
in Arizona. Another form of revenue gone because they had to play a playoff game in Arizona. And I love the Rams. Go Rams. They did a great job. But I mean, it's just...
It's a lot.
It is. It is. This city is shown itself to be dysfunctional. And I think the other part that is very frustrating is we get sidetracked on this whole thing with DEI and the wrong hires and da-da-da-da. And I don't think that's a worthy discussion. Mm-hmm. I think what is more worthy is like, how do you move forward?
Yes.
And how do you make sure we get this stuff corrected? Mm-hmm. I don't care who corrects it. As long as they are basically competent, capable, and know how to do their job, and maybe even be a bit creative about it, I'm fine. I really don't care. But I do care to see people's lives, 150,000. Like, some of these pictures are just showing kids who basically are now displaced. They don't have a school. It's already bad enough they didn't have school for the whole COVID thing, and then now with all the illegal immigration that came through, and this,
Actually, that was the funniest thing. Did you see how many immigrant posts there were? Or no, like in the streets and in the cities that were around the fire areas, they had like immigration, what is that? Like, we have to drive through and they have to prove that you're not an illegal immigrant. Like, they had those all over the place, right?
Oh my gosh.
Right afterwards, because they were all dispersing, and they're like, oh, we're just going to catch them now.
It's just, it's just a disaster.
Yeah.
It's just such a disaster. And at the national level, and this will be very interesting to see what happens under the new administration. But here we are putting 50 billion, 60 billion. It's like every 6 months, it seems like we're throwing billions of dollars at Israel, or we're throwing billions of dollars at Ukraine, or we're throwing billions. And now you have this. Like you had the hurricanes in the Carolinas, right? What a disaster that was. And FEMA was running out of funds and having some issues there. You know, you can't prevent certain things. Like a hurricane, I don't think you can prevent, but you can prep. Preparation is everything for success,
True.
right? And when you do not prep appropriately, you often find the success rate is very small. And I think that's exactly what happened in these LA wildfires. And I put it fully on the shoulders of our leadership for the lack of success in dealing with these fires.
Well, to our viewers, this has been quite an insightful discussion. And to all the families affected by the LA wildfires, we are praying for you. Local elections matter. Hopefully, this discussion allowed you to recognize that you got to go to the local election polls. And as always, the vote matters. So stay tuned for more upcoming content.